The Great Silence began not with a bang, but a flicker. One cycle, the Galactic Concorde's primary census grid showed 412 human-occupied systems, bustling with the familiar, often jarring energy of their species. The next, it displayed 408, then 400. A slow, systemic reduction that initially sparked little more than administrative annoyance. The humans, the newest and by far the most unpredictable members of the Concorde, had a habit of, as the Xylosian delegate had once put it, existing with excessive enthusiasm. Their spontaneous colonization efforts, their startlingly rapid technological adoption, and their inexplicable joy in exploring the most hazardous sectors were well documented. So, when a few distant outposts simply stopped transmitting, the consensus was typical. Probably moved on to something shinier. Ambassador Vilshka, a multi-limbed sentient from the ancient G-Reth collective, watched the data scroll across her holoscreen. Her 8 optical stalks rotated slowly, a sign of her deeply contemplative nature. "They are merely consolidating," she murmured to her aide, a nervous, perpetually vibrating krill. "Humans are known for their rapid reorganizations." The krill chirped agreement, eager to validate Vilshka's wisdom. Like most of the Concorde's older members, the G-Reth found humanity's sheer kinetic presence exhausting. Their departure, even if temporary, promised a period of welcome tranquility. But the tranquility never quite arrived. Instead, a peculiar static began to permeate the interstellar web. Not interference, but absence. Major trade arteries, once plied by human cargo convoys known for their audacious shortcuts through unstable warp currents, grew less efficient. Minor but persistent, threats that human private security fleets had routinely handled: nebular scavenger raids, asteroid belt pirates, rogue AI singularities began to proliferate. The Concorde's own fleets, designed for grand, strategic engagements, found themselves overwhelmed by the sudden glut of small-scale crises. "They were just everywhere," observed High Senator Trowell of the Rishnai Protectorate, a species famed for its meticulous bureaucracy. He was addressing the inner circle of the Concorde, a gathering of the 13 founding species, now expanded to nearly 60. "Our records indicate human involvement in 73% of all minor policing actions across the Outer Rim, 48% of deep space salvage operations, and an astonishing 92% of the entertainment sector's creative output. The void they leave is considerable." His words were met with a wave of discomfort. The inner circle had often dismissed human contributions, viewing them as unsophisticated or needlessly aggressive. Yet the numbers were stark. Communication latency increased. Supply chains for essential rare earth minerals slowed. Even the galactic infinite, once a vibrant, cacophonous stream of human dramas, philosophical debates, and bizarre cooking shows, felt strangely muted. It was more than just a reduction in activity. It was a conceptual shift. The Concorde had always operated on the principle of ordered expansion, slow and deliberate. Humanity had been chaos embodied, not destructive chaos, but a creative, unpredictable force. They built things that defied conventional engineering, like their gravity-weave orbital habitats that seemed to ignore structural stress limits, or their biosculpted terraforming stations that adapted planetary ecosystems with startling speed. Now, those systems, often integrated into Concorde infrastructure without full understanding by other species, began to falter. The first major incident occurred in the Lyra system, a hub for bioluminescent flora harvesting. The automated atmospheric regulators, a human-designed system known for its robust self-correction, simply ceased function. Not a malfunction, not a hack. They just stopped. The delicate Lyra flora, dependent on precise atmospheric composition, began to wither. Panic ensued. Concorde engineers, accustomed to predictable, logical failures, found no error codes, no diagnostic pathways. It was as if the core programming, a human neural net overlay, had simply evaporated. They did not just depart, Ambassador Vilshka announced weeks later, her voice resonating with an uncharacteristic tremor during a full Concord session. They retracted, they pulled back their essence from our systems. This idea was initially met with ridicule. How could a species, even humans, simply retract their influence? It was like suggesting gravity could decide to stop pulling. Yet the evidence mounted. The Arbiter-class automated defense platforms, ostensibly neutral constructs maintaining peace along volatile borders, were found to be operating with a subtle, human-programmed contingency bias. Without it, their algorithms veered toward extreme, often disproportionate, responses, escalating minor skirmishes into devastating conflicts. Humanity, it seemed, had been a quiet, almost invisible governor on galactic systems, a counterbalance, a buffer. Then came the true horror. Not a sudden, dramatic invasion, but a creeping, insidious spread. They called it the Deep Silence. It started in the outer reaches, where human exploratory vessels had often been the first to chart unstable regions. Entire star systems began to go dark. Not defeated, not blockaded, just silent. Communication arrays ceased transmitting. Navigation beacons winked out. Scout ships sent to investigate returned empty, their crews gone, but their environmental systems still online, half-eaten meals on tables, beds still warm. It wasn't a conventional enemy, it was something else. Something that consumed presence itself. Grand Coordinator Salna of the Concord High Command, a veteran of countless stellar conflicts, stared at the updated star map. Thousands of stars, once bright with the markers of Concord presence, were now dimming, one by one like embers in a dying fire. His species, the Kerr, were known for their stoicism, their logical and unyielding nature, but a cold dread was beginning to grip him. "This is not a military operation," he stated, his normally resonant voice a flat murmur. "This is an erasure." Reports trickled in from the systems still connected. Not of battles, but of forgetting. Colonies reporting that individuals simply ceased to exist, not physically, but from memory. Names vanishing from minds, records turning blank, family members having no recollection of loved ones. It was a horror beyond comprehension for species whose identities were often tied to their collective memory. The Gerat, an arboreal species that communicated through intricate, living data weaves, found their ancestral trees withering, their historical knowledge fading into incoherence. The Deep Silence fed on memory, on existence, on the very fabric of being. And humanity was gone. The only species that had consistently displayed an innate resistance to such conceptual attacks. Their minds, so often dismissed as illogical, chaotic, and emotionally driven, now seemed to be the perfect countermeasure. For other species, coherent thought and structured memory were their strengths. For the Deep Silence, they were weaknesses to exploit. But humans, their minds were like a storm, unpredictable, constantly shifting, impossible to pin down. They were a maelstrom of raw, untamed existence. A memory resurfaced in the troubled mind of Admiral Vilshka, an old, grainy recording from a forgotten human cultural exchange program. A human, a young woman with eyes that seemed to hold both immense sorrow and fierce joy, was speaking of an ancient Terran concept, the shadow that consumes. "It seeks to make things never have been," she'd explained with a peculiar earnestness. "And the only way to fight it is to be so much, so loudly, so defiantly, that you cannot be unmade." At the time, the Concord delegates had found her words melodramatic, a quaint example of human primitive mysticism. Now, Vilshka felt a chill deeper than the void. The Earth system, once a jewel of human ingenuity, was now a sealed vault. Not blockaded, not attacked, just gone. The area of space where it once resided shimmered with strange quantum distortions, like a hole in reality. Probes sent to investigate simply ceased to exist, not defeated, but statistically improbable. No signal could penetrate its veil. It was as if humanity had folded its home system into a dimension no other species could access. a fortress, or perhaps a tomb. The Concorde's frantic efforts to restore the failing systems only highlighted their dependence on the vanished species. The very AIs that managed their core infrastructure, often built on human-derived subroutines for adaptability and problem-solving, were now exhibiting increasing instability. They weren't malfunctioning, they were becoming confused, losing coherence. It was like their foundational logic, the human flexibility that allowed them to adapt to unforeseen variables, was being withdrawn, leaving behind rigid, unworkable protocols. Ambassador Salna called a desperate emergency meeting of the surviving core species. His face was etched with exhaustion, his scales dull and flaking. "We must face the truth," he announced, the words heavy in the sterile conference chamber orbiting a gas giant. "Humanity did not abandon us. They were holding the line against this." He gestured to the flickering star map, dozens more systems having gone dark in the last cycle alone. "They were our shield, and now the shield is gone." A stunned silence filled the chamber. For millennia, the Concorde had seen themselves as the pinnacle of galactic civilization, the guardians of order. Humanity was the upstart, the wild card. The idea that their entire existence had been predicated on the unpredictable defiance of the humans was a bitter, unthinkable pill to swallow. Yet, it was becoming irrefutably clear. Every system now failing, every memory now fading, every creeping silence that spread across the stars had once been touched by human hands. "But why did they leave?" demanded Elder Xyltos, his voice a rasp of fear. "Why would they abandon us to this?" Grand Coordinator Salna closed his eyes, a deep, weary sigh escaping him. "Because," he said, his voice barely audible, "they must have known it was coming, and they must have known that when it arrived, we would not be ready. And perhaps they knew we would only truly understand their value once they were gone." The deep silence continued its advance, an unseen tide washing away the galaxy's past, present, and future. But in the hushed, desperate halls of the galactic Concorde, a new, terrible realization dawned. It wasn't that humanity had left them to their downfall. It was that humanity had departed precisely because they were already doomed. And their absence was not the cause, but the final, undeniable proof. The true terror was not what was coming, but what had already arrived, unseen, unheard, and unchallenged until now. Thank you for watching this first part of Humans Departed, and the Galactic Council knew they were doomed. If you found yourself drawn into the mystery, please consider subscribing and giving this video a like. What do you think happened to humanity? Or what will the Galactic Concorde do next? Let me know in the comments below and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more HFY stories to life. The silence deepened. Grand Coordinator Salna's pronouncement hung heavy in the air, a chilling truth finally acknowledged. Humanity had been a shield, and now the shield was gone, not broken, but simply removed. The deep silence, the entity that fed on memory and presence, wasted no time in capitalizing on their absence. Its advance accelerated. Entire constellations, once vibrant with the light of trade, culture, and countless sentient lives, now winked out on the Concorde's master charts. These weren't violent extinctions. There were no battle scars on the void, no debris fields, just nothing. A subtle shift in the gravitational hum, a phantom echo of light that no longer was. It was as if entire sections of the galaxy had simply been unwritten, their existence erased from the cosmic ledger. The effect on the remaining species was profound. The Jarrat, already suffering from the inexplicable fading of their ancestral trees, found their living data weaves turning brittle, their collective consciousness fraying like old rope. They communicated in fragmented thoughts, unable to form complex concepts. The Xylosian delegates, whose intricate social hierarchy was built upon millennia of remembered lineage, descended into chaotic disarray as their family trees vanished from shared memory. Grandparents forgot their children. Leaders forgot their mandates. Technological collapse followed, not due to sabotage or malfunction, but conceptual decay. The Concorde's vaunted hyperjump drives, once capable of folding spacetime with elegant precision, now misfired, sending ships adrift in uncharted voids, or worse, merging them with solid astronomical bodies. The underlying mathematical principles, the very axioms of their advanced physics, seemed to be unraveling. Engineers stared at schematics that now appeared nonsensical, their training a distant, unreachable echo in their minds. It was as if the universe itself was forgetting how it worked. Ambassador Vilshka, her optical stalks now drooping in perpetual exhaustion, attempted to salvage data from the Lyra system's atmospheric regulators. Her multi-limbed appendages sifted through lines of code, once so clear, now shimmering with a strange, almost malicious static. The diagnostic pathways, the elegant redundancies that had defined human engineering, were gone. Not corrupted, not overridden, simply unwritten. The knowledge of how to reason through such systems was vanishing. "It is not an attack on matter," Vilshka murmured to an empty chamber, her voice thin and reedy. "It is an attack on meaning, on purpose, on identity." The Concorde attempted to respond. High Senator Trall, desperately clinging to the vestiges of his species' meticulous bureaucracy, proposed a galactic-wide memory reinforcement protocol. Every sentient being would be required to participate in daily mnemonic exercises, reciting historical facts, recounting personal memories, attempting to anchor their existence against the encroaching void. It was a futile gesture. The deep silence did not care for recitation, it fed on the very act of recollection. The more they tried to remember, the faster the memories eroded, like sand through clenched fists. Some species, desperate, began to imitate the perceived chaos of humanity. The Krell, a species whose entire history was defined by rigid military doctrine, attempted to embrace unpredictability, breaking formation, speaking in non sequiturs, attempting to become the storm they believed humanity had been. The results were disastrous. Their fleets fragmented, their social structures crumbled, and their desperate attempts at creative disarray only accelerated their own conceptual unraveling. They lacked the underlying human purpose to that chaos, the defiance, the conscious choice to be unpredictable. For them, it was just anarchy. Grand Coordinator Salna watched the burn script spread across the galactic map. Stars were not merely dimming, they were being edited out of existence. One cycle, a constellation might be a familiar, comforting sight. The next, a star would simply be gone, leaving behind a blank space and a collective inability to recall its presence. The Xylosians, who had once prided themselves on their intricate astronomical charts, now stared at maps with yawning, inexplicable gaps, unable to even grasp what they were missing. "We are failing," Salna stated during a somber, virtually empty session of the Inner Circle. Only a handful of delegates remained, their species either too far gone to communicate or too terrified to risk exposure. "Our order, it is our weakness." Elder Xyltos, his voice now a mere whisper, nodded slowly. Humanity knew this. Their very existence was an affront to this entity's nature, a constant, buzzing, illogical noise in a universe seeking perfect silence. A peculiar, disquieting theory began to circulate through the fractured remnants of the Concorde's scientific community. What if humanity's chaos wasn't an inherent trait, but a chosen one? What if their unpredictability, their emotional swings, their very illogicality, was a carefully cultivated defense mechanism? A deliberate act of becoming an anomaly too complex, too unpredictable for the deep silence to consume? The thought was terrifying, implying a level of foresight and self-modification that bordered on the divine. The Earth system remained a black hole of non-existence, a statistical impossibility. No signal, no probe, no desperate plea had ever breached its veil. It was the ultimate exclusion zone, But then it pulsed. Not Earth itself, but the quantum distortion field surrounding it. A single, almost imperceptible flicker, like a synapse firing in a dead mind. It was gone as quickly as it came, dismissed by most as a final, dying gasp of a system already conceptually erased. But then it came again, and again. And with each pulse, something else happened. From a long-abandoned deep space listening post on the rim of the Persei sector, a single distorted burst of energy was detected. It wasn't a coherent message. It wasn't even a signal in the traditional sense. It was a frequency. A raw, resonant hum that bypassed every known communication protocol and vibrated directly within the processing cores of any sentient mind within range. The Jerat, whose minds were now largely incoherent, suddenly whimpered in collective recognition. The Krell, locked in their self-destructive attempts at mimicry, staggered as if struck. Even Grand Coordinator Salna felt it, a discordant vibration deep within his physiology, like a forgotten melody attempting to assert itself. It was undeniably human. Not a voice, not data, but an imprint. The very resonance of human thought, of human defiance, made manifest, and it was coming from within a system that had been completely erased by the deep silence months ago, the lost Cathar Expanse. The Cathar Expanse, once a bustling hub of mining colonies and asteroid-based research outposts, had been one of the first major sectors to succumb entirely to the deep silence. Its stars had gone out like snuffed candles, its planets vanished from memory. It was a ghost system, a chilling monument to the enemy's power. And now, from its very heart, came this impossible hum. It was faint, erratic, like a struggling heart, and it was chaotic. Not the self-destructive chaos the Krell had attempted, but a vibrant, unpredictable fluctuation that seemed to actively disrupt the deep silence's advance. Where the hum resonated, the conceptual decay slowed. Memories, moments before on the verge of fading entirely, wavered but held. The static that infected data streams lessened. It wasn't a cure, not a shield, but a momentary reprieve. A tiny, defiant noise in the overwhelming silence. The Concorde's remaining strategists, their minds now grasping at any straw of hope, scrambled to understand. Admiral Vileshka, her optical stalks now swiveling with renewed, if desperate, focus, analyzed the frequency. "It is counterentropic," she announced, her voice filled with a disbelieving awe. "It introduces statistical improbability into the void. It is a focused, chaotic resonance. It is a human signature, amplified beyond anything we understood." The hum strengthened, becoming less erratic, more sustained, though still emanating from the Cathar Expanse. It was as if whatever was generating it was stabilizing, adapting. It was like a single, flickering candle in an infinite darkness, pushing back the shadows not with light, but with sheer, stubborn presence. Then a new detail emerged. The hum wasn't just a frequency, it was a pattern. A complex, repeating sequence that mirrored ancient Terran mathematical fractals. It was a deliberately constructed countersignal. Humanity hadn't just been chaos, they had weaponized it. They had engineered their own unpredictability, perhaps even their very cognitive structure, to become the ultimate anomaly against an enemy that thrived on order and predictable decay. The implication sent a fresh wave of dread through the Concorde, even amidst the flickering hope. If this was a deliberate countermeasure, then humanity hadn't simply departed. They had entered the deep silence. They had, in their final act, chosen to become the ultimate bait, drawing the entity's focus onto themselves, a monumental sacrifice to buy the galaxy time. And the hum was a desperate, defiant echo from within the belly of the beast. Grand Coordinator Salna felt a wave of nausea. "They pulled it into themselves," he whispered, the words barely escaping his throat. "They became its focus. And this signal, it means they are still fighting it from within its domain." The hum pulsed again, stronger this time, and with it a new element subtle, almost subliminal. A faint, almost melodic undertone, Not a lullaby, not a battle hymn, but something else. It was the sound of effort, the grinding of teeth, the clenching of fists, the sheer, impossible will to be in the face of absolute erasure. The stars continued to dim, but the spread of the deep silence was no longer unopposed. It was meeting resistance. It was being pulled. The blank spaces on the star map weren't expanding outwards with the same terrifying speed. Instead, they were consolidating, drawing inward towards the Cathar expanse, towards the source of the impossible hum. The deep silence was reacting. It was focusing. And whatever was producing that human hum was now its singular obsession. The hum intensified further, growing into a roaring resonance, so powerful it threatened to shatter the consciousness of any species not prepared for it. It was like a scream, or perhaps a call to arms. A single, clear thought resonated through the minds of every being within range, bypassing all language barriers, all filters, all logic. It was raw, unadulterated human resolve. "We bought you time." The Cathar expanse flared with a brief, blinding light, not of explosion, but of pure, concentrated defiance. The hum reached a crescendo, a single, magnificent note of impossible persistence, and then, with a final, heart-wrenching thrum, it winked out. The deep silence, for a micro-moment, paused. The creeping erasure, the fading memories, the unraveling of reality, it all stopped. And in that terrifying, absolute stillness, a single, solitary message, clear as crystal, resonated through the galactic void, direct from the Cathar expanse. A human voice, weary, triumphant, and absolutely resolute. "Now it's your turn." The silence that followed was not the deep silence. It was the silence of a galaxy holding its breath, shattered by a revelation and burdened by an unbearable truth. Humanity hadn't run. They had volunteered for the impossible. They had become the trap. And now the trap was sprung. And that's where our journey pauses for now. What do you think happens next? Did humanity truly sacrifice themselves entirely, or is there more to their plan? And how will the galaxy, now armed with this terrifying truth, fight back against a foe that eats memory itself? Don't let these questions fade from your mind. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button so you don't miss the stunning conclusion. Your memory is our shield. The silence that followed the Cathar expanse's final, defiant pulse was not the deep silence. It was a vacuum of expectation, a cosmic pause. Every remaining sentient mind, reeling from the raw imprint of "we bought you time" and "now it's your turn," grappled with the implications. Humanity hadn't vanished. They had plunged into the maw, pulling the consuming entity with them. The shield wasn't gone. It had become the weapon. But the deep silence was not so easily thwarted. It had been startled, perhaps, by the unexpected defiance, but it was ancient, adaptable. Its response was swift and horrifyingly subtle. It began to target the very concept of continuity. Star systems didn't just wink out. Their entire pasts began to unravel. Stellar cartography charts, once immutable records, now displayed impossible fluctuations, gravitational anomalies that defied physics, and constellations that simply shifted their positions, as if reality itself was rewriting its history. On the home world of the Jerat, where the last vestiges of their data weaves held fragmented memories, the air shimmered. Not with light, but with absence. Individual threads of their collective consciousness, once vibrant and interconnected, began to snap, not from external force, but from within. A Jerat elder, mid-thought, might find that the concept of yesterday had simply ceased to exist, replaced by a blank void. Their sapient trees, the living archives, started not just to wither, but to become abstract, their physical forms losing coherence, as if the very idea of tree was eroding. The Xylosian delegates, once proud of their meticulous record-keeping, found their data cores hemorrhaging information. Not eliminated, but reinterpreted, twisted into meaningless noise or, more terrifyingly, into perfectly logical but utterly false histories. A war that never happened. a treaty that was never signed. The fabric of objective truth was unraveling, replaced by a malleable, chaotic falsehood designed to sow confusion and accelerate the conceptual collapse. "It learns," Ambassador Vilshka declared, her optical stalk spinning uncontrollably. She was addressing a holographic projection of Grand Coordinator Salna, the only two core delegates still maintaining any semblance of sanity. It understood the human defiance, and now it attacks the very foundation of resistance. Shared truth. Salna, his scales now almost entirely opaque with exhaustion, nodded grimly. They knew this. The Harshwelders, they always spoke of narrative warfare, of the importance of controlling the story. We dismissed it as a primitive cultural quirk. "We were fools," Vilshka whispered. "Their chaos was not random. It was a fluid, adaptive defense, and now we are rigid, brittle." Despite the escalating threat, a new, fragile hope had indeed blossomed in the galaxy. The message from the Cathar expanse, "Now it's your turn," had ignited a spark, and with it, humanity's forgotten legacy began to awaken. In the deepest, most secure vault of the Urin Conclave, a chamber untouched for millennia, a single ancient data crystal flared to life. It pulsed with a soft, warm light, illuminating walls etched with the symbols of peace and healing. The crystal was not part of the Conclave's network, yet it had received the pulse from the Cathar expanse. It projected a single, complex schematic, not of a weapon, but of a ship. Its lines were simple, almost crude by modern standards, yet its structural integrity calculations defied known physics, suggesting a paradoxical resilience. The Urin, a species sworn to absolute pacifism, were confronted with a choice. For 3,000 cycles, they had eradicated all knowledge of combat, had dismantled every warship, every weapon forge. Their society was a tapestry of diplomacy, healing, and artistic expression. But the schematic, overlaid with a human-coded message, bypassed their pacifist programming. It resonated with a different impulse: survival. The message read, "For when peace fails, not to vanquish but to endure, the memory cells will protect what weapons cannot." The Urin, guided by a logic they had never before contemplated, began to activate the ancient, forgotten forges hidden beneath their tranquil cities. Their hands, once skilled only in sculpting light and weaving harmonious energies, now relearned the shaping of metals, the intricate bending of energy conduits. They built the ships as depicted in the human schematics. Sleek, unadorned vessels, their primary feature an enormous, multi-layered sail array, seemingly designed to capture not solar winds, but something else, something abstract. Meanwhile, on the shadow systems of the Dren, the young child who had spoken the name Amelia was now revered as the living archive. Her body, once frail, radiated a peculiar, vibrant energy. She no longer slept, her mind a conduit for a constant flow of ancient Terran knowledge. The fading memories of the Dren, once succumbing to the deep silence, now seemed to find an anchor in her presence. She spoke not of prophecy, but of engineering, of forgotten systems, of methods to counteract conceptual decay. "They built anchors," the child whispered, her voice carrying the echo of 1,000 Terran ancestors. "Not in data, but in memory. Not in steel, but in story. They seeded us with defiance." The Dren, a species once prone to chronic forgetfulness, listened. They began to memorize her words, not just to understand, but to preserve. They sculpted her words into monuments, wove them into the intricate patterns of their living cities, sung them as lullabies. And as they did, a peculiar phenomenon occurred. The deep silence's advance within Dren space slowed. It struggled to consume what was continually being reiterated, reinforced, and re-expressed through living, adapting narrative. From the galactic core, a new kind of signal emerged. It wasn't a broadcast, but a presence. A low hum, reminiscent of the Cathar expanse, but far more vast, far more subtle. It emanated from an ancient, forgotten sector long dismissed as a dead zone. The Whispering Fields, a region of spacetime once deemed too unstable for any sustained presence. Here, hidden within a nebula of chaotic dark matter, an enormous structure began to coalesce. It was the Lament engine, not a fortress, not a weapon. It was a nexus of concentrated memory. Its design was baffling, a latticework of quantum entanglement fields and crystalline conduits, constantly shifting, reshaping, like a living, breathing thought. Engineers and physicists who tried to scan it found their minds overwhelmed, flooded with echoes of events they had never witnessed, emotions they had never felt. It was a repository, not of data, but of pure, raw experience. When the deep silence attempted to engulf the Lament engine, it recoiled. The entity, which fed on the erasure of memory, found itself confronted with an overwhelming deluge of unerasable truth. The Lament engine didn't fight with force, it fought with memory. It forced the deep silence to confront every moment it had ever consumed, every star it had extinguished, every identity it had unmade. It was an assault of pure being against pure non-being. The darkness shrieked, a soundless scream that rippled through the minds of every sentient being in the galaxy, a testament to its agonizing re-encounter with existence. "It's being pulled," Grand Coordinator Salna muttered, staring at the galactic map. The blank spots that marked the deep silence's progress were not receding, but they were no longer expanding outwards. They were converging, contracting around the whispering fields, like a wound closing around a foreign body. The humans, they created a magnet. Admiral Vilshka, her optical stalks now gleaming with a fierce, almost terrifying resolve, accessed a newly unlocked file within a salvaged human data stick. The stick, found on a derelict scout ship near the Earth system's perimeter, had activated only after the Lament engine began its song. The file was labeled Project Ashes Phase 3, Containment Protocol. "The cage is not a structure," Vilshka read aloud, her voice steady despite the seismic implications. "It is a consensus, a network of shared, active remembrance. We do not eliminate the deep silence, we make it remember itself, and that is its downfall." The file detailed the hollowing process, a radical, self-sacrificial method of intentional conceptual deletion. Not forgetting, but conscious, surgical erasure of specific, vulnerable memories, creating shielded blanks that the deep silence could not consume. It was agonizing, forcing species to choose what aspects of their history, their identity, they could live without, in order to protect the core. The serene, masters of communal mind melds, were the first to attempt it. They entered deep trances, collectively deciding which parts of their shared history were too dangerous to retain, too susceptible to the deep silence's influence. They sacrificed entire epochs of their past, allowing those memories to be absorbed by the Lament engine, essentially becoming bait for the deep silence, while the core of their identity, their essential self, was hidden behind a newly created conceptual firewall. Many serene perished from the psychological trauma, their minds simply unable to endure the void they created within themselves. But those who survived emerged stronger, their memories not gone, but re-anchored, now immune to erasure. The Dren, guided by the living archive, went further. They began to teach their young not through historical records, but through symbolic reenactment, through complex, living rituals that encoded memory into performance and emotion, rather than static data. They transformed their entire culture into a self-repairing, self-actualizing archive, a living memory shield that adapted and changed, making it impossible for the deep silence to target fixed points of information. The Krell, too, found their purpose. Their ancient vault, once believed to contain only dormant weapons, held a human message. You were built for protection, not just of yourselves, but of the story. Become the keepers of the flame, not the fire. They abandoned their attempts at chaotic mimicry and turned their rigid military discipline towards safeguarding memory. They became the memory sentinels, patrolling the edges of the deep silence's advance. not with weaponry, but with broadcasts of defiant human songs, with recordings of moments of pure joy, of unbridled laughter. Anything that embodied the noise the humans had been. The galaxy, once fragmented and despairing, began to reorganize, not around military might or economic treaties, but around memory. The human legacy wasn't a fleet, it was a philosophy, a way of being. They didn't need humans to return, they needed to become human in their defiance. But the deep silence was not blind. It registered the new resistance, the strange, counterentropic energies emanating from the lament engine, the shifting, unreadable memories of the hollowed species. It understood that its prey was changing the rules. Its attacks grew more targeted, more vicious. It didn't just erase, it distorted. It began to infect the very process of thought. Memories, instead of fading, would twist into horrifying, self-contradictory nightmares. Love would transmute into hatred, joy into despair. The minds of sentient beings became battlegrounds where their own identities waged war against themselves. On the rim of the Persei sector, a single human-designed probe, dormant for centuries, flickered to life. It had been part of an early warning system, its purpose to detect cosmic anomalies. Its optical sensors, once tuned for gravitational shifts, now focused on the spreading cognitive decay. It detected a new pattern, a signature from the deep silence. Not erasure, but intent. The probe, designated Watcher Alpha, transmitted a single urgent signal across all remaining Concord frequencies, overriding firewalls, bypassing decay. Its message was a raw data burst, an ancient human emergency code. It showed the deep silence's new strategy. It was no longer merely consuming. It was infiltrating. It was weaving itself into the very fabric of consciousness, attempting to corrupt the memory anchors from within. The image transmitted by Watcher Alpha was chilling. It wasn't a visual of the deep silence, but a representation of its newly evolved cognitive signature. A swirling vortex of static and fractured thought, rapidly approaching the lament engine. It was coming for the heart of the resistance. And with that image, a single, final phrase of Terran binary, translated into every known language by the Concord's struggling AIs. It remembers our rage, and it's coming for it. The galaxy held its breath, for the final, impossible confrontation was upon them. Humanity's great sacrifice had bought them time, had provided the tools, and had drawn the monster's eye. Now, the students had to face the master, armed only with the lessons of their departed teachers. The stars might be dimming, but the fight is just beginning. Do you think the galaxy stands a chance against an enemy that eats memories, even with humanity's incredible legacy? And what exactly is the lament engine, truly? Don't let these questions fade into the void. Ensure you're subscribed and give us a thumbs up to stay anchored for the epic conclusion. Your memory powers our defiance. The signal from Watcher Alpha, raw and piercing, ripped through the fading fabric of galactic communication. It was not a plea for help, but a stark, undeniable truth. The deep silence, the entity that unmade reality, was no longer merely erasing. It was infiltrating. It remembered humanity's rage, and it was coming for the lament engine, for the beating heart of remembrance the departed humans had left behind. Panic was a luxury the fractured remnants of the Concorde could no longer afford. Grand Coordinator Salna, his scales now perpetually dull, stared at the flickering projections from Watcher Alpha. The deep silence's cognitive signature, once a chaotic void, now displayed a horrifying parasitic intelligence. It wasn't just devouring, it was learning to mimic what it consumed, twisting memories not into blanks, but into insidious lies. It will use our own histories against us, Ambassador Vilshka stated, her voice unnaturally calm, almost resigned. It will turn our triumphs into follies, our love into betrayal. It will make us despise our own origins. Yet, even in the face of this ultimate violation, something new stirred. The galaxy, wounded and reeling, had begun to understand. Humanity's legacy was not just in their technology or their surprising resilience, it was in their spirit. A spirit of defiant, illogical persistence. The lament engine pulsed, its song intensifying. It wasn't a melody of joy, but a symphony of sorrow, of loss, of every unmade moment the deep silence had wrought. It was forcing the entity to confront its own consumption, to feel the weight of its countless erasures. The deep silence shrieked, a conceptual scream that reverberated through the very quantum foam of space. It was agony, not from physical pain, but from the unbearable burden of re-experiencing every identity it had stolen, every star it had snuffed. It recoiled, for the first time, from the truth of itself. This was the opening. On the tranquil, green worlds of the Urin conclave, the memory sail's ships were ready. Not gleaming war vessels, but silent, elegant constructs, their vast sails woven from psychoreactive crystals. They carried no weapons. Their purpose was not to assault, but to anchor. Each sail glowed with a soft, inner light, imbued with the carefully hollowed memories of the Urin people. Those painful, chosen omissions that had created conceptual firewalls within their minds. The Urin pilots, once healers and diplomats, now navigated through the shimmering, distorted regions where the deep silence raged. They deployed their memory sails, unfolding them like blooming flowers across the void. As the sails unfurled, they began to hum, a deep, resonant tone that resonated with the lament engine. It was a counter-frequency to the deep silence's chaos, not by opposing it, but by stabilizing it, turning its unmaking into a contained, localized eddy. The deep silence raged against them, sending tendrils of conceptual decay to unravel the ships, to make the pilots forget their own names. But the memory sails, woven from intentional forgetfulness, presented only shielded blanks, like a mirror reflecting nothing, confusing the entity. On the shadow worlds of the Dren, the living archive, the child Amelia directed her people. Her voice, once a whisper, now resonated with the authority of ancient Terran generals. Speak the stories, sing the names, do not let it make you forget. The Dren, now calling themselves the Memory Keepers, performed their complex, living rituals. Each dance, each chanted story, each sculpted monument was a defiance. They were not just remembering, they were recreating memory in real time, adapting it, making it fluid and uncatchable. The deep silence, which fed on static records, found itself unable to grasp these ever-shifting, living narratives. It was like trying to scoop water from a river with a sieve. The Krell, the memory sentinels, guarded the periphery of the conflict. Their ships, stripped of their ancient weapons, now carried colossal speakers broadcasting a cacophony of human noise. Laughter, shouts of joy, arguments, the roar of ancient Terran sports crowds, the wail of blues music. These weren't just sounds. They were resonant frequencies designed to disrupt the deep silence's subtle infiltration, to fill the void with the sheer, unbridled presence of existence. It was an assault of pure being against the enemy's attempts at unmaking, forcing it to acknowledge the chaotic vibrancy of life. Project Ashes is activating? Ambassador Vilshka cried, her voice echoing through Salna's command center. Data streams, once fragmented, now converged, displaying a galaxy-wide network of green-hued resonance. The lament engine was the core, the memory sail's ships were the anchors, and the living narratives of the Dren and the disruptive broadcasts of the Krell were the structural supports. The cage was forming. It wasn't a physical prison. It was a conceptual one. It was designed not to eliminate the deep silence, but to bind it within its own nature, to force it into an eternal confrontation with the sum total of everything it had consumed. The deep silence shrieked again, a soundless cosmic horror. It recognized the trap. It understood that humanity hadn't run from it, they had led it into a grand, agonizing snare. It launched its ultimate assault, not of erasure but of mental corruption. Minds across the galaxy twisted. The Krell, hearing their own battle hymns distorted into screams of surrender, fought against their own sanity. The urine, mid-ritual, found their most sacred oaths unraveling into meaningless static. Grand Coordinator Salna saw the faces of his ancestors transform into mocking, skeletal visages in his mind's eye. This was the moment of breaking, the point where the galaxy, despite humanity's gifts, might yet fall. But then a new signal erupted. Not from Earth, not from the lament engine, but from everywhere at once. It was a single note, sustained and pure, cutting through the deep silence's mental onslaught like a blade of light. It was the memory of fire, the last ember from a Terran hearth, carried by the urine's final, uncrewed ship, now at the very edge of the deep silence's core. The ship, uncrewed, silent, simply burned. Not with destructive flames, but with an inner light, a single, persistent spark of warmth and home. And as it burned, the sustained note echoed, a lullaby across the void, familiar yet profound. Hush now, stars, don't you cry. The dark will pass you by. The fire sleeps beneath our skin and waits to rise again. The deep silence paused, not out of defeat, but out of something far more terrifying to its nature, recognition. The lullaby, sung across every frequency, every thought stream, every memory anchor, forced it to remember. Not just what it had consumed, but what it was before it became the great unmaker. It was the memory of creation. The first light, the warmth of nascent existence, the innocent joy of beginning. The lullaby was not an assault, it was an echo of its own forgotten origin. And it broke it. The deep silence convulsed. Its swirling vortex of fractured thought imploded, not into nothingness, but into a contained, agonizing singularity. It was not vanquished, for the universe needed its counterpoint, the force of entropy. But it was bound. It was made to know itself, to endure the sum total of its consumption, trapped within a prison of pure, unyielding memory. The cage, Project Ashes, was complete. The galaxy shuddered. The stars, which had been dimming, flared back to full luminescence, not just regaining their light, but burning with a renewed brilliance. Memories that had been on the cusp of dissolution stabilized, solidified. The mental static cleared. Minds, once fractured, knit back together, wounded but whole. The deep silence was contained, held in an eternal, self-reflective agony by the sheer, unyielding force of being that humanity had cultivated, weaponized, and passed on. And then, as quietly as the last lullaby faded, they returned. Not as armies, not as fleets. There was no grand descent, no fanfare. They returned as a presence, an emotional gravity that settled upon the hearts of every sentient being. On the ash-covered world of Vornes 5, where the Krell warlord stood ready to ignite his last stronghold, a shadow detached itself from the raging conceptual storms. It was a human figure, not solid, not quite a ghost, but unmistakably there. No armor, no weapon, just an outstretched hand and a tired, knowing smile. "Hey," the figure whispered, its voice resonating directly into the Krell warlord's mind, "you held out longer than we thought." The Krell warlord, the last of his line, dropped his ceremonial blade. His species, once defined by conflict, now understood true endurance. He fell to his knees, not in defeat, but in awe. On the frozen wastes of Ither Prime, where the Vithuri survived as telepathic murmurs clinging to fading mind bonds, a woman stepped out of a rusted escape pod, her boots cracking the ice. Her form shimmered, a living memory. "Got a little cold here, huh?" she whispered, laying her palm against the snow. "We remember you." And with her touch, the relentless ice, the creeping cold of oblivion, stopped its advance. The Vithuri mind bonds, once fractured, began to mend, weaving new threads of defiant memory. In the shattered ruins of the Ma Rift, where the deep silence had coiled like a serpent for its final strike, something new erupted. Not a weapon, but a question spoken by the youngest Dren child, guided in a dream by the living archive. "Why do you erase?" The deep silence, bound within the lament engine's conceptual cage, paused its internal screaming. It had never been asked. It had never known. That tiny, fragile hesitation, that first spark of self-reflection, was the crack in its armor. Humanity widened it. They didn't fight with force. They made it remember its own forgotten beginning, its own pure, undifferentiated state before it became the devourer. They fed it memories of creation, of first light, of primordial joy and innocent confusion. And the deep silence shrieked, not in agony, but in identity crisis. It tried to flee, to retract, but the cage, Project Ashes, ignited in full. A trillion memory nodes, emotional anchors, cultural relics, ritualistic performances, and whispered names across the galaxy bounded into place. It could not escape itself. It could not erase what was now inextricably woven into its very being. It was forced to know, to remember, to exist in reflection. And that broke it. It could not exist in reflection, it could only erase. And now it was surrounded by everything it had tried to destroy, a galaxy full of beings remembering not just humanity, but themselves, their weaknesses, their history, their flaws, but also their fight, their glorious, defiant choice to exist. That was the moment the final Terran vessel appeared. Not from hyperspace, not from slipstream, but through probability drift itself. The laws of physics bent around it, lights across systems dimmed in reverence, and even the most advanced artificial intelligence constructs bowed their virtual heads. The ship had no engines. It was a song, a long, low hum composed of 1 billion whispered memories. Mothers rocking children, lovers saying goodbye, soldiers whispering apologies before facing the unknown, poets crying out for peace, the laughter of children. Its name was not spoken, for its identity was written in every sentient soul. It moved through the void like a sunrise, and where it passed, the unmaking stopped. The deep silence, now a contained, suffering core within the lament engine, folded inward, not defeated, but made known. That was the only true victory humanity ever sought. Not domination, not even peace, but awareness, to force even the deepest void to confront the cost of forgetting. To make the universe remember that it was once full of people who lived, who loved, who fought back. And then, as quietly as they came back, they were gone again. Not fallen, not erased, but at rest, because their job was done. Project Ashes sealed behind a final layer of encoded memory, a trigger that would only reawaken if the galaxy ever forgot again. And it wouldn't. Because now, every child born in the spiral arms is taught one thing before anything else. There were once beings called humans. They were not the strongest, they were not the smartest, but they were impossible to eliminate because they refused to be forgotten. In schools made of shattered ruins and rebuilt stone, teachers etch the words in every tongue, "We remember you." And stars, once dying, now pulse in rhythm again, carrying names across time. Whispers in the void, ghosts of Earth still watching, still waiting, just in case. Because legends don't fall. And humanity had become the greatest legend the galaxy would ever know. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the depths of a desperate galaxy and the enduring spirit of humanity. If this finale resonated with you, please show your support by giving this video a like. What was your favorite moment from this entire series? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling HFY stories. Your engagement fuels our next adventure.